Hello, YouTube. I felt it was probably a good idea to maybe explain a little bit about the components of a clock. Um, I have not shown on these vids how I actually ran these things through the saw. I figured that if you were going to be attempting a clock, that you probably already know how to run a table saw, bandsaw, router table, etc. Just wanted to say something about jigs. Jigs are a very, very important thing for making anything accurate, especially things like the spacers that are in this clock. Like, for instance, this spacer right here. It's exactly 4.5 inches. There's 4 spacers on here. So I had to use a jig to make sure that I cut out all those parts at 4.5 inches so that when I put the frames together, it would be accurate. Now, one cool thing about a jig is, all right, so it's supposed to be 4.5 inches, but you know, chances are it's going to be a 32nd over if you were to put a micrometer on there, or a 64th over, which is pretty extreme in woodworking, you know, 64th of an inch. But if you make a jig, they're going to all be a 64th over, and that's going to ensure that the frame goes together properly. And that works in cabinet making and all kinds of things. So learn how to make jigs. There's also, you know, some small parts on here. Jigs will help you in this, you know, be safe. I'm not going to be running, let's say if I had to cut this dowel off at a 1/2 inch, you know, I'm not going to be running my bare hand a 1/2 inch away from the spinning table saw. I'm going to use a jig so that I can keep my hands, you know, a foot away from the spinning blade, and I can accurately cut out, let's say, a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch dowel. And that's just basic woodworking, basic safety procedures. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have all my fingers. So let's get on to what the 4 major components are. The first component is, see if I can move this down without jittering too much, is the dial train. The dial train consists of this 20-tooth gear right back here, this 8-tooth gear, this 30-tooth gear, this 10-tooth gear, and this 30-tooth gear. What this mechanism does, and it's a separate mechanism, is ensure that when the minute hand goes around once, the hour hand goes around 1/12 of the time. Or you can think of it the opposite way. The hour hand's going to go around once, and the minute hand's going to go around 12 times. And that's a 12-to-1 ratio. And that's pretty much a constant in all clocks. So that's one component right there, dial train. The next component is the drive train, which consists of the drive wheel. Now this wheel, you can't probably see, I'll show you this later, is there's a pulley back here, which the weight is attached. It has a ratchet. So this drive wheel here is almost like a little sub-assembly of the drivetrain. And then the gears, there's usually the gears in clockmaking, these are called wheels, and then these are called pinions. So we got a wheel and a pinion, a wheel and a pinion, a wheel and a pinion. And those are being driven by this drive right here. The third assembly is the escapement wheel, which is this guy right here. This one happens to be a 30-tooth escapement wheel. It's attached to a 10-tooth pinion. The most important thing is this is the escapement lever right here. Now, I don't have the pendulum hooked up to it yet, but the pendulum is hooked up directly to this thing. So this will, let me see if I can make it stop. Make it swing and stop and push. Yep. And if it wasn't for this lever right here, moving back and forth, stopping this escapement wheel from spinning, because if I were to take that escapement lever off and just put a weight on here, the clock would just spin until really fast until the weight hit the floor. So this little lever here is what's stopping the clock at a certain rate. It sounds like a big, mathematical wizardry thing, but once I'll explain that in another video. It's not that difficult to make or understand how this thing works. The fourth component is the frame itself. In clockmaking, this is the front plate and this is the back plate. That's what they call it. And these are the spacers. Okay. The front plate and the back plate are holding the axles in a steady, accurate place on the clock. So the spacers have to be, pretty stout in this clock here because there's so much weight. And it has to be held in place accurately so that all the axles are lined up perfectly to one another. All right? So anybody, I think, with any amount of time, now granted, this was a large amount of time that I spent on this so far, and I still got a ways to go. It's almost ready to be hung on the wall, but I'm thinking another week or so, I think I'll be able to do that. But with a little determination and a little bit of knowledge, I think any woodworker can make a clock. It's not that hard to do. It takes a little time, but it was really, really a fun project, and I really enjoyed doing it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put together probably like a 4-part series explaining the math, explaining those sub-assemblies, the dowel train, the drive train, the escapement, and the frame itself. So bye for now, and I'll put up those other videos real soon. Thanks.